He's taught at universities in Israel, in the U.S., in Latin America, and Africa. And in addition to his many academic and political writings, he is the author of Between Redemption and Revival, the Jewish Yeshiva in Jerusalem in the 19th century, and Obstacles to Peace, a resource manual of articles, maps on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
We need governments because governments are, if they're not elected, at least they have a certain formal authority. They're the ones that negotiate. They're the ones that sign treaties. And we, the people, can't do that. We don't have that mandate. But as we all know, governments will not do the right thing. Period. Unless they're pushed by the people. And we've seen that in every issue, and I'm sure all the issues that you're all involved with, that this whole building is involved with, has the same experience. It's not unique to Israel-Palestine. The fact is that the governments are not our friends. The governments are not our allies. Sometimes there's nice people in governments, and they're nice and they'll give you 20 minutes of a perfunctory kind of lunch or something, but really they're not our partners. That's my view. Certainly coming out of this issue of Israel-Palestine. And that's why it's so important that civil society organize, and that civil society creates its own international presence to push the government. But also, we really have to be on the barricades to protect those areas of civil society that we've managed to carve out. I'm thinking, for example, of human rights. That's really under attack. International law. In many ways, the whole status of the UN, to the degree that there's a certain amount of civil society representation in the UN. And because, and I'll talk about this a little bit, I don't want to deflect attention from the conflict in Israel-Palestine and the occupation, but there's also this idea that I've been working on that's called global Palestine. And that is that Israel has a very tough sell. And that is, how does Israel maintain its legitimacy as a country, promote the idea that it's the only democracy in the Middle East, continue to have its international standing upgraded all the time by the EU, by the UN, Israel is now a candidate to a seat to membership in the OECD, the club of the most advanced economies in the world. Do all that and at the same time maintain its occupation, maintain an oppression. Now, there's a very interesting part of politics that I'm writing about now that I think has escaped us a little bit, that's called security politics. There's normal politics, which isn't always the most transparent in the world, but it's more transparent. Normal politics, and especially international politics, is when countries sign treaties. To some degree, at least, there's some oversight of parliaments. It goes through some committees, or at least it's announced and it's known, and there's that kind of a political relationship that all countries have. Security politics, by its nature, because it deals with security, and security these days, what's happened certainly since 9/11, but this is something that Israel is really encouraging, and it's strengthening this thrust. It used to be that the military and internal domestic security and policing were very separate functions. And governments were always very careful to separate between the external, the military, and the internal security. In fact, your policing and your internal security get to the very essence of your sovereignty. So countries have always resisted outside countries or outside agencies coming into their domestic spheres of security and policing. Well, a lot of that ended. I mean, it was before 9/11, but 9/11 kind of crystallized it, in which all those things have come together as a package. And Israel has very much encouraged this, because security politics is kind of the underbelly of normal politics. Because it's security, it isn't transparent. And not only isn't it transparent, but people accept the fact that it's not transparent. So in normal politics, if your government signs a treaty and people don't know about it, people feel that, you know, they've been hoodwinked, this isn't honest, something fishy is going on, because it's supposed to be transparent at any rate. With security politics, you don't have that expectation. It's supposed to be secret. And we don't even want to know, and we shouldn't know about it. Because, you know, you shouldn't tell security secrets because that endangers our security. In other words, you create a situation where people actually support the idea that there's a whole realm of international relations that isn't transparent, outside of our knowledge, and somehow that's good for us, that it's like that. And this is the area, I think in particular, that Israel has really begun to work in, because you have to look at the occupied territories not only as occupied territories, but as a laboratory in which the Palestinians are really guinea pigs that are being experimented on in order to develop both weaponry and tactics of the new kinds of warfare that have really emerged since 9/11. That's counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, and urban warfare. And what's interesting is that you know, this has to do with the whole framing of things and the terms that's used. If you go out on the street and you ask the people, who are the insurgents? They'll tell you they're the bad guys. Wherever they are, they're the bad guys. But, you know, we forget that the insurgents are really the people. So we've gotten to a situation where any kind of resistance to domination of the capitalist powers, the core powers of countries like Israel, of any country, you know, the problem with terrorism, the whole word terrorism, which is another part of the equation, is that it's only applied to non-state actors. It's not applied to states. So you have this kind of a special status that states have, where they have power, they have authority, but they're not held accountable for the most part, because the way we frame things like terrorism and insurgencies and so on is that those are the bad guys. And they're the ones that are the bad guys. They're the terrorists. And the states become the good guys, defending us all. Even though, as we know, the states are infinitely more culpable of terrorism than the groups we call terrorists. There's a very interesting book by a guy named Rummel, R-U-M-M-E-L, that's called Death by Government. And he estimates that over the course of the entire 20th century, something like 170,000 innocent people were killed by what we call what are called terrorist groups, non-state actors. There's a lot of people, 170,000 innocent civilians. But he estimates that over the course of the 20th century, between 170 million and up to 360 million innocent people have been killed by states.